What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Manion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Manion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. All right, well, we are back with another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. I have with us today Bo Nickal. Bo, I have to tell a funny story. So when you came to our TMF Gala a couple years ago as a guest of Jocko's, and I knew your name because I come from a wrestling background family. And so I knew the name Bo Nickal. If someone said, who's Bo Nickal, I'd say Penn State wrestler, right? But I couldn't have pointed you out of a lineup. And I remember I was in the cocktail reception and I walked through and I immediately saw your cauliflower ears. And I'm like, who the hell is that guy? And so I grabbed someone and I was like, who is that? They're like, oh, that's Bo Nickal. And I'm like, oh my God, no way. And so my uncle is the biggest Bo Nickal fan there is. So I immediately called him the next day. I'm like, hey, guess, you were at our gala. We have a lot of impressive people at our gala, a lot of senior military leaders. And I said, hey, you're never going to guess who was at the gala last night. He's like, who's that? I'm like, Bo Nickal. He's like, no way. I wish I would have been there. So that was my first time meeting you was at our TMF Gala. It was awesome that you came.
Yeah, no, I had an amazing night. It was such a cool experience. And as you mentioned, so many amazing people. Of course, as a guest at Jocko, got to sit with him at dinner and listen to him speak, which was amazing. And yeah, it was just cool to be a part of it. And the cauliflowers are always a dead giveaway. That's probably my most recognizable trait.
Yes, yeah, it was my brother's most recognizable trait as well. They were actually telling a story the other night. I was with a bunch of his friends from 1st Recon Battalion that he served with, and they would always say that, they'd go to the dojo and they'd try to get people to fight, and they'd say, hey, you want to fight? Lieutenant Manion's looking to fight. And they'd be like, oh, the guy with cauliflower ears? No way, I'm not fighting him. Like, nobody would fight Travis just based off his ears alone, Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your background and getting into wrestling. And I talk about wrestling a lot. And so Jocko and I have had a lot of conversations about wrestling. And on my podcast, it naturally comes up because I did not wrestle, but my life growing up was shaped so much by the wrestling community with my brother wrestling. And so I'd love to know, you do come from a wrestling background though, family of wrestlers, right? Was your dad?
Yeah. So it starts with my grandpa, actually. So my dad's dad, he wrestled in college in a school in Colorado, and he was a wrestling coach. And then my dad got into it, and my dad became a wrestling coach, and now here's me. So, 3rd generation wrestler. And I love the sport so much. I love the people, the community. It's so special. And I think that what I really love about it, having, transitioned into MMA now, and seeing kind of a different culture, is just the humility and the blue collar work ethic. And, of course, like when you're in the NCAA tournament or you're in a scenario where there's one team versus another, you get a little bit of that tribalism. But at the end of the day, what wrestling has that's special is it's all respect. And if you've gone out on the mat and competed and you know what that's like, or if you just are watching wrestling matches day in, day out, and you're part of that family, like it's all respect and love at the end of the day. And I feel a lot of support from the wrestling community, and I love to be able to, give back through clinics or, just being around and being with the community as much as I can. So, it's something that's very, very special to me and very, very important to me.
Yeah. One of the things growing up, watching my brother wrestle from a young age, and that for me, I played lacrosse in college. That was my sport growing up. And every time I watched Travis on a wrestling mat, anytime I watch anyone on a wrestling mat, like the biggest thing for me, and it's a lot of the conversations I have when I talk about the sport of wrestling is, you know, that's it. The isolation of the sport, like you can't hide. There's no hiding, you know, in a team sport where there's 12 of you out on a field. Like if you're not having your best day, you have other teammates that can kind of step up for you, but you don't have that opportunity on a wrestling mat. And so I've always had so much respect for the sport of wrestling and number one, the men and women that are willing to step out on that mat, because it is something much greater than stepping out on a field with 12 other players. But also this idea of, you know, growing up and watching my brother on that wrestling mat, there was, and I do not think there will ever be anything more stressful than watching your loved one compete in one-on-one on a wrestling match. And I think about it now, like my mom, I remember, you know, there's that viral clip from a couple years ago of the mom breaking her glasses in half. And like, that was my mom, like the passion inside of her, she was going to jump off the bleachers where we had to be like, Janet, chill out, you know, chill out. But I get it. Like I could not imagine watching, and I know he was my brother and how I felt, but like watching my child out on that mat. It's just, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. For me as a competitor and an athlete, you know, you get nervous, but once I'm out there, I'm just doing my thing.
Right.
So the nerves they fade away very quickly and the training takes over. So I'm not really thinking about it, but yeah, when it's your buddy or, you know, somebody that you're really close with that goes out there, it's almost, you just want to throw up because you can't do anything and they're out there by themselves. You just want to help them and support them, and it's just them at the end of the day. But it's part of what makes the sport so special because that is so difficult. And I think that everybody, whether or not they wrestle for an extended period of time or just, you know, a season, I think everybody should try it and just feel that pressure and what it's like, because I think it's good for you. It's good for your character and just to know, I think most kids, especially with my dad being a coach, I kind of took a different perspective to the sport and saw it from more of like a coaching perspective from a young age, even though I was competing. And I just see the confidence that it builds and the character and what it does for kids who stick with it, who maybe, you know, nobody at the beginning is good. Like, you know, you're going to get thrown down and you just got to see how you're going to respond to that. And if you stick with it for long enough, you'll start to figure it out and you'll start to have success and win matches, like no matter what. And I think that what that does for somebody just creates this belief, and that's why there's so many wrestlers, even though it's a very small sport, a small community, that go on to do amazing, great things, is just because of the resilience of what that builds. And it's again, very, very special. I love it. I love the sport so much.
And I love what you said. And again, it's a conversation. I actually had this conversation with Jocko on the podcast a few weeks ago because I have a 10-year-old son who loves lacrosse. He loves football. He loves basketball. He hates wrestling. And his name is Travis, named after his uncle. His godfather is Joel Sherritt, Iowa national champ. Like literally and what we did is we put him out on the wrestling mat at 5 years old and he's a big kid. So he was wrestling like 8, 9-year-olds and he was just getting like destroyed. So he wants nothing to do with the wrestling mat. And we've like worked through this strategy. Joe Mass and I have worked through the strategy of like, now what we presented to him just recently, we were with Joe's son, Dominic, who's a great young kid. And I'm like, listen, Dominic, we just got to get Travis back on the wrestling mat. So now the approach we're taking is we're saying, we just want you to go into pursuit to wrestle so you can get better in your other sports. And honestly, for me, if that's all it is, if he just goes and works out at Joe's wrestling academy and becomes stronger and more confident and builds his resilience, like that for me is all. Like I don't need a son that's a national champ. I just want him to learn the fundamentals of what it means to be on that wrestling mat, because it's going to teach him so much more in life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because when I see people, a lot of the people that are super passionate and love the sport, after they finish up competing, it's not the people that are the most successful.
Yeah.
It's the people that learn the most lessons through it. And so that's why it's, I think, important just to try it and do it. No matter what level you're going to get to, it helps you learn about yourself, because you're going to get put in situations that there's really not very many opportunities to be put in situations like that in general. And so that's every opportunity. Every time you do that, it's an opportunity to learn. And I love the idea of, hey, this is just going to help you with these other sports. And that's true. It is because the awareness and what we have to do to train our bodies to be in shape, there's nothing else like it. I think that I look back at when I played football in high school, and a lot of times I would, wrestle all the way through the summer, and then we'd start preseason football, and all the other kids, we'd finish up practice and we'd run like 10 40-yard dashes or something like that. And I wasn't the fastest kid, but the last 5 40s, I was like winning every single one, just because my conditioning was unreal. And, it was like whatever, benefit I think no matter what sport you play, wrestling will benefit you just because of how hard it is, the conditioning, and then mentally to just be able to lock in and focus on what your role is, what your responsibility is, even when you have to do that yourself out on the mat. But then when you get teammates around you, you can, I think, be a better teammate as well.
Totally. I love that. So let's talk about your transition from wrestling to the MMA. You had your first amateur fight in 2021. And when did you decide that, did you know graduating college, like, this is what I want to do next? Like, were you already thinking that? Like, how did that evolution happen?
Right. So I was always a fan of mixed martial arts, a fan of the sport growing up, just watching the UFC and stuff like that. It was a normal weekend for my family. We'd get together, go to Buffalo Wild Wings, watch the UFC fights. And so for me, it was always in the back of my mind, maybe when I'm done wrestling, I'm going to do this. And when I was in college, maybe my sophomore or junior year, I did a wrestling clinic in Missouri, and one of the guys, a dad who his son was at the clinic, he did jujitsu, and he asked me if I wanted to go do the jujitsu practice. It was like right next to where I did the clinic, and I was like, sure, I'll try it. Let's do it. And so I went in and basically just did the practice and loved it. I was like, this is so fun. And now obviously having the wrestling base and then kind of getting a little taste of another martial art, I was like, okay, now I gotta learn boxing. I gotta learn Muay Thai. Like, I'm so interested in all these other martial arts. And so I through college continued to focus on wrestling. I graduated in 2019. And then my thought was, all right, the Olympics were supposed to be in 2020. I'm going to continue to train exclusively in wrestling through the Olympics. And then I'm going to transition to MMA. So that was my plan, towards the end of college. Obviously, the Olympics were pushed back to 2021, so I extended the wrestling career by a year. And then when I finished up, ended up second in the Olympic trials, so didn't achieve my dream of being an Olympic gold medalist, but I felt like happy and content with the way my career kind of was summed up. And so I was just excited to pursue something new and transition to a new sport. And it's been a whirlwind. It's gone really quickly, but it's been so much fun. And it's just to me, MMA, there's so much excitement and opportunity and growth that is available within the sport. And so these last 3 or so years have been a blast.
I mean, you had a pretty quick rise to fame within MMA, within the UFC, and I'll share a quick story with MMA. So one of Travis's best friends is a guy named Brian Stan, And so Brian played football at Navy. Travis wrestled at Navy, obviously. But then when they were in the Marine Corps together, you know, Brian started getting into MMA. Well, the problem was Brian had like great striker, but if you got him on his back, you know, he had no ground game. And so Travis used to train him. Like Travis trained him on his ground game. And in fact, Travis was his corner man for his first MMA fight. And yeah, and so and I watched Brian throughout his UFC career, and again, just like wrestling, it is the most painful thing to watch when you have someone you love out on the mat. But you know, the energy at a UFC match is like, I mean, there's nothing like it. I can't imagine what that felt like for you the first time you walked out there.
Yeah, you know, so that was one of the things that really drew me to MMA was the excitement and the intensity around the events. For college wrestling, you get that, you know, with the NCAA tournament, Big Ten championships, a big duel, the environment is similar. And so when I transitioned to Olympic style wrestling, there's really not much of that. You know, it's the best wrestlers in the world, but the environment is not as intense. It's kind of, for me, I was always a guy that I got up and I got excited and I wrestled better the more pressure was on me. The more intense the environment was, you know, if we were away at a duel at Iowa and the crowd's going crazy, like I'm just going to go out there and compete even better. And so I had a little bit of a hard time wrestling, even though I'm competing against the best guys of the world in like an environment that really, it felt like practice. And so I had a hard time getting up and getting excited for it. But coming into MMA, I did 2 amateur fights, and even the amateur fights, like the environment is intense. Yeah. And then obviously, you know, from there, I had my first professional fight in Richmond, Virginia, you know, very cool environment. And then from there, I was like basically straight into the UFC. So very early in my career, all of a sudden I'm competing in T-Mobile Arena on a pay-per-view in front of 20,000 people, sold out crowd, millions of people watching worldwide. And I felt like, you know, definitely nervous and definitely excited, but all of my years in wrestling and all of the high pressure situations that I'd been in, I felt prepared me really well for that. And so, you know, as I mentioned before, you got the nerves. The most nerves I feel are right before I walk out, right before, like I'm standing behind the curtain, the crowd, you know, everybody's going crazy. I'm about to walk out. And then once I walk out, I get in the cage, it's like every nerve melts away. It's like the closer, it's like the peak nerves are right before. And then as soon as the fight starts, I'm just relaxed, letting my training take over and having fun.
I love that. But you making it into the UFC in the way you did, like there's typically a much longer kind of journey to get to where you got, right? Yeah.
So my expectation was to have to get, you know, 10 or 12 fights before I was even getting looked at by the UFC. And, you know, it was interesting. My first pro fight, I came out and I didn't wrestle at all. I knocked the guy out in 30 seconds. And so. Is
that the guy with the like longer hair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've seen that clip.
There's a highlight of it. It was like on ESPN and stuff. So basically what happened was UFC has another platform called UFC Fight Pass that is basically a media arm for regional promotions to do videos of the shows, and it's basically like a media network. And so the UFC, what happens is the UFC gets all the numbers and knows all the analytics for the shows. And so when I knocked this guy out, of course there was already a lot of viewers and a lot of excitement from the wrestling community to watch me, but then the clip gets put on ESPN and it did like 3.5 million views in a week or something like that. So right away the UFC saw the analytics and they were like, dude, we got to sign you. Let's go.
They're like, who's this guy? Let's go. Yeah.
And so I'm 1-0 and I'm like, all right, like I would love to get, you know, a bunch of more experience. I've only been training. I haven't even been training a year. You know, I've been training like 7 months as a fighter, and it was my first pro fight. So, but at the same time, I thought about it, and I kind of realized that the path of continuing to try to get fights outside the UFC is not likely, because at the end of the day, everyone's trying to get to the UFC. And so who's going to fight me now, right? Like,
Right.
I've got this massive name and there's really no upside for them. But if I sign with the UFC, I can get guys to fight me, because once you're there, you're there. Like, you got to fight whoever they put in front of you. And so I kind of took some time and realized that was the best decision for my career. And just got to be able to pivot under new circumstances, right? Because at the beginning, I expected to get a bunch of fights. Obviously, it didn't work out that way, but I just have to prioritize my training and development that much more, and just be even more of a professional day to day, so I can make up all the ground that these guys I'm fighting have, inexperience. They've been fighting for a dozen or more years, whereas I've been fighting, 3. And so it's been brought its own challenges, but they're all fun challenges, and I'm excited to just figure them out. So
how does that work with a UFC fight? Because, you see online, like I saw recently, I was looking up like recent news, Bo Nickal, and I keep seeing this, what is it? How do you say his name? Khamzat?
Yep.
Khamzat. Mm-hmm. Like, so it appears that you're taunting him to fight, that you're putting feelers out there. You're kind of saying how you feel like this fight, you're challenging him. Is that how is that how it works, where, or can they just say to you, Bo, you are fighting this guy and this is the date, and again, ask you, are you ready? Or can you really kind of taunt someone and then they say, okay, yeah, dude, I'll fight you? Like, how does that process actually work?
Yeah, the UFC is interesting. I compare it to the Wild West, because it's like almost no rules. Other sports, there's a preseason, a schedule, a season, a playoff, a championship game, and then it's over. And with the UFC, it's like, first off, there's 50 plus shows a year.
Yeah.
There's always stuff going on, and you can fight once a year, you can fight 5 times a year, and you can fight whoever. There's no real rule set that says you have to fight this guy or that guy or whatever it is. But the way it works, the UFC has matchmakers that are, all their job is to create fights. And so basically, they try to get guys that are going to put on competitive fights. There's obviously entertainment aspect of the sport as well, so they want to put on entertaining fights. But there's also a ranking. So there's a top 15 ranking. And generally, if you're ranked in the top 15, you're trying to move up. So it gets a little political, where if a guy's ranked, number 5, he doesn't really do him a lot of good to fight the number 11 guy. So it just there's not like a specific way to do it, but basically, you're trying to move up those rankings. And so you look for opportunities to continue to move you along. So some guys, will ask for a fight, they'll turn it down because it maybe doesn't make sense for them business-wise. For me, I'm in a position where I'll fight anyone at any time, and I'm moving up very quickly. So, there's people that want to fight me and there's people who don't. It's like, there's people that look at fighting me as a no lose, because if they lose the fight, no worries. They were expected to lose. But if they get lucky and win, obviously there's big upside there. And then there's people that are further along in their careers, maybe they're like in the rankings, that they're not really interested in fighting me at this point because I'm not in the rankings yet. And so it doesn't move them closer to that championship fight. And at the same time, it's not really a great matchup for them. Like, more than likely they're going to lose. So, it gets political, right? People want to try to take the path of least resistance to the title for the most part.
Yeah. But I mean, if this guy came back and said, all right, let's go, Bo, like that, then you guys could figure out a fight. You pick the date and go from there.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Right now, where he's at, he's like going to be fighting for the championship. So he just won a big fight, a top 5 fight. So he'll be fighting for the belt soon. And so I need maybe 3 or 4 more fights before I get to the belt. Because then once you get the belt, you're pretty much fighting the number one contender every time. And that's, there is a little bit of a fan element to it. So I think that right now with me calling him out and trying to build up, we're just trying to build up that fight. And the original reason that I did was because I just believe that he's one of the best guys in the division, one of the best guys in the world. And I think it'd be an interesting matchup stylistically, because obviously I come from American wrestling background. He has Russian wrestling background. And, a lot of people are scared and intimidated by that. And I'm not. So I want to go see, just go head to head and see who is better, who's going to come out on top. It's no disrespect, no ill will, but I want to be the best in the world. So I have to beat the best guys.
That's awesome. Now, is he 185?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the weight class that you'll compete at now?
Yeah. I'll be 185. It's a good weight for me. We'll see. Things could change. In college wrestling, I always went up weights just to get challenge myself more and just to get different opponents and competition. And so I could see myself going up at some point. But for now, there's so much work to be done within the 185 division. So I'm focused on that.
Awesome. I saw your one post where you were cutting down, I guess, from 208 to 185, and and you had the carousel, and it was you under all these towels, and I was laughing because it doesn't look like too much has changed in terms of like how you cut weight. Like I remember sitting on the couch I'd be sitting on the couch, and like Travis would be on a bike and in a rubber suit, and he'd buy Big Red, like, the pack of Big Red gum, because I think like the spiciness of it like made your mouth salivate. And he'd have a Dixie cup, and he'd be riding the bike and shoving like 5 pieces in at a time and just spitting in the cup. And, and it was like totally normal in our house, but you think about it, it's a little like barbaric. But it doesn't look, it's basically make yourself hot and get rid of the water. So there's not much innovation that has come since then.
Yeah, for sure. Same thing. It's never easy. It's never fun, but you just do it. And that's one of the biggest advantages as a wrestler coming into the UFC, is because I've weighed in hundreds and hundreds of times from the time I was a young age, and, doing that stuff in high school and in college. And it's very normal for me. It's no big deal. Whereas a lot of these guys have done it, 15, 20 times in their whole life. So a massive advantage that the wrestlers have is just being able to have a system and understand like how your body's going to feel, and then just go execute. And you just kind of push the feelings and the uncomfortableness. You just don't think about it. You just do it because you're used to it.
Yeah. Totally remember that. Switching subjects a little bit. I had seen you had a clip where you talked about, and I loved it. You talked about how you struggled a lot with judgment. And you talked about struggling with judgment from yourself and from others. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and share a little bit more about kind of that journey with struggling with judgment, because, people are watching this, they see you, they're not going to look at you and say, oh, this guy, this is something that he struggled with. Like it just, it seems counter to who you are and everything that you do.
Yeah, that's been a big thing for me for a long time. As a kid, I was always very focused. So, most kids, they're thinking about, going to a birthday party or, hanging out with their friends. And I was just focused on wrestling. And it was just from a young age, I was like, I want to be an NCAA champion. I want to be an Olympic gold medalist. Like, that's what I want to do. And this was like as 7, 8-year-old kid. And not only did I say that, but my actions aligned with that. So I spent a lot of time training. I said no to a lot of normal kid opportunities. And I was the kid that at the wrestling tournament where everybody was running around, messing around between their matches, I was sitting in the stands with my dad watching. And on the weekends, if I didn't have a tournament, I was with my dad at a high school tournament, and I was watching the guys. And I would go before even flow wrestling was a thing. I was watching wrestling videos on YouTube and just always obsessed with the sport. And so when I got older, that just kind of, I continued to like almost double down on that attitude because I saw good results come from it. I would win wrestling matches and win tournaments, and it would make me feel good. And so then I would continue to just be disciplined and do what I was doing. And so when I got to, I always felt like I didn't understand why other people didn't do that. Like, it was like, if you have a goal, you want to do something, you just do everything in your power to make that happen. And it probably was like the most prominent in college, because now we're becoming adults and we get to make our own decisions. And so some kids are doing different things, they're going out and partying. And I'm like, dude, no way. Like, I'm not drinking a sip of alcohol. I'm not going out to bars. Like, I'm locked in because I want to achieve these goals. And so when I had teammates that weren't doing that, I felt like, what are you doing, man? Like, just kind of a negative emotion. And I realized that probably it took me, working with sports psychologists, continuing to, dive into my faith and learn from people that I looked up to, and just going through a lot of lessons that it helped me just to realize that everybody's on their own path. And at the end of the day, we're not all called to be, national champion, world champion, this or that. And we're not, you really got to be, if you come at people from a place of empathy and a place of trying to understand, that I think that that's really how strong relationships are formed. And when you can let go of that judgment of other people, that it just helps you, it's like a weight lifts off your shoulders. And I feel very much more free, and realizing that nothing anybody else does or any decision that anybody else makes is personal to me. Even if it seems personal, it's really not. We're all on our own path. We're all on our own journey. And I think where the lesson has kind of led me now is not only realizing that about my view of other people, but realizing that about my view of myself. Because I think that one of the things I've struggled with a lot as well, being just wanting success, is when I don't achieve that and when things don't go my way, I can get very down on myself, and I can feel like all my work and all my effort was wasted. And in reality, that's not true at all. It couldn't be further from the truth, because the wins and losses are just part of the process. And really, for me, focusing on the process, focusing on development, and just becoming the best version of myself, that's what I try to lean into more than ever nowadays, because I'm a very goal-oriented person. But you can let the goal become bigger than it needs to be, because at the end of the day, the goal and the success, that's not my identity. For me, my identity is found in my faith, is found in Jesus. And so I have to look at that every day and remind myself that. And even though I'm going to work hard, I'm going to do everything I can do to achieve my goals, I'm doing it because I love it, and because I've been blessed with opportunity to pursue that. And I want to just honor God with those blessings and those gifts. And really, doing that isn't winning and losing. It's just giving 100% effort, focusing on gratitude, and those are continuous lessons, though. It's not really like, I don't feel like I have it figured out. I just continue to try to polish and refine that every day. And I'm really just learning a lot about myself in the process, and learning a lot about, relationships and faith, and I'm enjoying it.
I love it. And you remind me so much of my brother, because you're like, I didn't understand those kids that were always going to the parties. Like, that was me. I was the kid. And my dad always used to say, that I had the like natural God-given athletic talent. And I didn't do enough to harness it. I went on to play lacrosse in college, but like, it was just kind of what I was gifted with. I didn't do anything to focus on it. And when we were young, we had a bench press in the basement, and we had like wooden beams above, and Travis would write his goals down, and it was like national champion, you know, whatever it was, always related to wrestling, right? And he would write them down on this beam, and he was so, and I always said, like, my brother was like cut from another cloth, because the discipline he had at a young age was just different. It just was. And, you know, a majority of kids are kind of focused on more of like the social aspect and, you know, all of that. And like, and I think some of that is like, you're born with that. Obviously, you know, I'm sure your dad played a large role in it. I'm sure, you know, my dad as a Marine Corps colonel played a large role with my brother, but I was his kid too. And I was like, let's go. Where's the next, you know, where's the next party in the cornfield? You know, that was me in high school. And I think one of the things is like being introspective, and Travis was really introspective about like what his goals were. I have notebooks, and they are filled, and they're from college, and they are filled with every day after practice in college, Travis would come back and write down like what went well and what didn't. And it was like, you know, swept the leg too quick or this or that. And he would like write down like the top 3 things that went well in practice and the top 3 things that didn't, what he was going to be focused on the next day. And like this idea of like journaling, right? It's kind of a newer concept. Like he was doing that back in 2000. And so again, all that to say is like, I feel a lot I see a lot of him in you, and it's really kind of cool. And, you know, you talk about God and your faith, and one of the things that you have said is like, there's so many different ways, like you talk about like cold plunging and sauna and meditation, but at the end of the day, it's about that spiritual journey, right? Mm-hmm. And you said that's as easy as just picking up the Bible and starting to read the Bible every day. And is that something that like that spiritual journey for you, is that new? Or is that something that's kind of guided you all along?
It's always been part of my life. So growing up, it was a normal Sunday for my family and I to go to church, and we'd spend time, you know, before meals praying, before bed praying, and talk about our faith, talk about God. And so that was always a normal thing for me. But I think that as a kid and growing up, it was just a family thing. It was like, that's what you do as a family. So I go on Sunday, our family goes to church, we pray as a family. And so it was more of just the family is that's how we do things. And then when I got a little bit older, you know, later in high school, I started, I guess, thinking more for myself about what my faith meant to me. And I started attending Bible studies and getting around other kids that were also interested in their faith. And it was November 11th of 2013 that I was at it was like a youth group, like a bigger youth group in the North Dallas area where I went to high school. And at the end of the youth group, this guy at a church, the guy was like, does anybody want to be baptized that hasn't been baptized yet? And I was with 4 of my friends, and I was just, and he's like, if you want to be baptized, come up here right now. And I didn't say anything to him. I just got up and walked up there. Wow. And at that moment, I was like, I'm making, you know, this public statement that I'm going to choose to live my life this way, and I'm going to choose to accept Christ into my heart. And so that was when, for me, it really became my own decision and a real thing, and something that I was going to prioritize. And I'm really glad that I did it at that time, because it was maybe 6 months later that I left for Penn State for school, and I was, you know, 1,000 miles away from my family. And luckily I was plugged in with the team, so I had a really good group of guys around me. But it's like, you see people take different paths and different trajectories in college, because now it's the first time they really have that autonomy. And so I made that decision that this was going to be a priority, that my faith was going to be a priority to me before I left, and that remains true to this day. It's to me the center and the foundation of everything I do in my life, and I try to, continue to grow and learn in my faith the same way I train my body for competition. So, for me, I look at every day for me, it's mind, body, and spirit, right? Like I'm mentally trying to continue to sharpen myself physically, obviously through training, sharpening myself, and then the same way try to sharpen myself through faith, because I think we all go through battles, mentally, physically, spiritually, and if you're not putting effort into improving yourself in that in those ways, then I think they can deteriorate. In the same way, if you focus too much on one, you can let the others go by the wayside. And so I try to just keep that balanced. Obviously, the center spiritually, but I think the sharper I am spiritually, I can be sharper mentally and sharper physically as well.
So if someone says to you, or what would you say to the person that comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm in a bad place. How do I start the journey to be of sound mind, body, and spirit?" Like what are some beginning steps you would say to someone to take?
Yeah, I mean, I like meeting people where they're at. So, you can tell people, I can tell you what I do every day, and that might have zero application or help for you. Sure. Because I've been doing this stuff for years. And so if somebody's first starting, it's really just about simple little things, simple little wins. I think trying to surround yourself with people that are who you want to be in the future. That's what I always have done, and what has been a massive help for me. And I think just having that community aspect, like to me, training at the gym, that's a community thing, because even though it's an individual sport, I still have to have training partners. I can't just go in and hit the bag every day and expect to achieve my goals. I have to have people that I'm around. And the same way, to me, church now is a big it's getting together as a community. It's the people are the church, right? It's not the building. And so it's like being with people that I just feel the energy. I just feel more energy coming into me than what's going out of me whenever I can be around people. And so I would say that to somebody that's starting off, don't feel like you got to do everything alone. Try to surround yourself with people that are doing what you're doing. The easiest way to do that would be go to the gym, go to the church. And then I think for me, I would say that's a little bit more of a solitary journey, because I grow more mentally, just like, I guess, becoming introspective. But it's also important, I think, regularly to share those feelings. So I have my best friend, Anthony Cassar. He was heavyweight national champion in 2019. We lived together for 7 years or so, and he still lives in State College area. So, me and him, he's a very introspective guy, and he's rubbed off on me a lot because I've become more introspective, and we will take time every, so often, every couple weeks, and we just sit and chat and talk about stuff. And because most guys don't do that, most guys are like, they just internalize everything and they feel all this pressure and the weight gets heavier and heavier. And I think that when you have a guy, you don't have to have 100 guys, but if you have one guy that you can find that you can share things with and talk to him about the things that are going on in your mind, that mentally that'll be a massive help, because more than likely they're going through the same stuff. And so I think, to sum that all up, hit the gym, whether that's you like to lift weights, or, I would suggest even to try to find a jiu-jitsu gym or a boxing gym somewhere where you're doing like some type of combative. And then church, obviously the people at church are there. They're not there because they're healthy. They're there because they need help. They're sick, right? And it's the same. You don't have to feel like you're going to be judged at church. There's going to be a strong community there that's going to want to lift you up. Yeah, and then I would say mentally, try to continue to sharpen yourself mentally, but find somebody that you can share things with, that you feel comfortable just being vulnerable with. And if you can do those three things, that's, I think, a great start to just continue to improve in those arees.
Yeah, I love that. Go to the gym and go to church, right? That's a pretty good winning combination.
Yeah, don't isolate yourself, right? Like, I think people feel like I've had this feeling a lot in the past where I'm like, I'm the only one that feels this way in the whole world. Like, I think the devil tricks us into thinking that we're the only one going through this experience. And in reality, everybody on earth is going through a life experience. And there's a lot of people that you're going to share a lot of that with, and who are going to be going through the same things as you and struggling with the same things. So, being able to just, be around people. You don't even have to talk about it all the time, but just be around people. Ideally, be vulnerable once in a while. And the more vulnerable you are with somebody, I think they can share that, right? Like, every time I'm vulnerable with somebody, I'm not getting made fun of. Like, it's, we find out that we have more in common than not usually.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when you think about, like, when you talk about a spiritual journey, right? That can sound isolating, because it can sound like something like, all right, this is something I got to do on my own, and it's actually just quite the opposite.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I always look at my life like it's not ever going to be that way forever. It's going to be phases, right? So, I had phases of my life as a kid where I'm pretty focused on one thing. And now, and as a young adult, the same thing. All right, I'm pretty focused on this. And now it's like, I'm married. I have a 1-year-old son. I'm a professional fighter. I am a business owner. And so there's a lot of things going on, but you get the opportunity to choose what your priority is going to be. And for me, my priority is my faith. After that, it's being the best husband and the best dad I can be. And then it's, being a professional fighter. And then it's owning, helping the businesses that I'm partnering. And so it's like, if you can, and I think that as I continue to grow and get older, eventually, hopefully my wife and I have more kids. Eventually the kids are going to move out. Eventually the fighting career is going to be over. Eventually the business is down. I'm going to sell them. So it's like, what's next, right? And I think that, faith and that spiritual journey is going to remain consistent, but I don't think we need to attach ourselves too much to, like, what's going on in the present. It's always a process, and it can always improve, and it's going to go up and down, and you're going to have to deal with challenges, but that's just part of being human, and it's the fun part.
Yeah. I love that. So is there, outside of the Bible, is there a book that has influenced you or shaped you the most, or that you would recommend to others to read?
There's a lot of books that I really like. I love Extreme Ownership, obviously. Jocko, great book. A lot of lessons within that for just, I would say, personal growth, development, a lot of business and relationship advice that I think is important. So that's one I like. And I would say another book that shaped me a ton is The Four Agreements. And
it's a great
I don't know,
book.
have you read that?
Yes,
Yeah.
great
Okay.
book.
So the one that, I mentioned it earlier, but the agreement that I think is the most important to me at this time in my life is not to take things personally, especially being in the public and having everybody blast their opinion about me to me all the time. It's like, I think realizing that nothing is ever personal is such a massive realization, and it's helped me so much because I have a lot of negativity spewed my way. And in my mind, it's like, you can fight that with more negativity. The guy's like, all right, you suck. I'm like, no, you suck. He's like, okay, that's not leading us anywhere.
Yeah.
But when you realize it's not personal, when people say things, it's just really a reflection of themselves and how they feel about themselves inwardly. Like, it seems kind of cliche, but I think when you really understand that and you really live that out and practice it, your life will be much more peaceful, and you'll be able to use that energy, that mental, physical, spiritual energy in a more productive way.
I would imagine that, and obviously I've read both books, Extreme Ownership and The Four Agreements. I think, like, that's a nice combination for a starter set on, like, if you're really trying for self-improvement. Those would be two really great books to read. So I love that. I like both of those together. Yeah, two great books. This podcast started with this idea of, like, how you overcome adversity. And, I started it just dealing with the death of my brother and walking through what that looked like over the course of the years as I processed, his death and living a life worthy of his sacrifice. And then I started to really look at this idea of resilience and the idea that, frankly, every single person needs to build resilience and needs to understand what it means to live a resilient life. And everybody has a story of how they've had to overcome. You've definitely, just from your time spent on a wrestling mat, have been taught resilience even without knowing it. When you think about this idea of resilience, and I don't know if you ever truly have, but when you think about what it means to live a resilient life, like what are some themes that come to you?
Yeah, I'll tell a quick story that I think will help some people. So first off, I've been really blessed and fortunate in my life. A lot of the struggle and the highs and lows of my life have been through wrestling, through sport. So it's almost like I got to experience highs and lows in a less serious environment, in a less serious way. But for me growing up, it was like, that was everything. That was as real as it got. So I felt like, winning and losing to me it felt like life and death sometimes. And obviously it wasn't, and I've grown past that, but in the moment, I felt that. And so I'll go back to when I was a freshman in college. I competed in the NCAA wrestling tournament. I was the number 1 ranked guy. I made it to the finals, and the guy that I was competing against, I had beat many, many times. I was much better than him. And so there was a moment in the match where I got thrown to my back. He got 6 points, and long story short, I ended up losing the match. And so my goal coming in was to be a 4-time national champion. And now I lost my freshman year, the first one, in a massive upset. At that point, I think it was the biggest upset in NCAA history. It was like number 1 seed versus number 11 seed. And so, very embarrassing moment for me, just crushing, devastating. And after that, I felt just depressed, because for me, it was like part of me was like died in that moment, because I had wanted that so bad, and I had done everything for so many years to be able to achieve that. Now it was gone. And so it was months and months where, I would literally like have nightmares about that moment, or I would have dreams where I won the match and then I'd wake up and I realized that I didn't win, and like those were even worse. And so it was a dark place for me. And now I look back on it and I'm like, that's such a blessing to be able to just experience that in sport and not have to experience it in real life. So I don't like, I look back on it very differently. But to continue, I went through the summer, and I basically was like depressed, and I got up one day and I decided, I was like, all right, man, are you going to just like cry about this forever? Or like, what are you going to do? Like, you just going to sit here and whine, or are you going to get back on the horse? So start training hard again. I refocus, I make a new goal. I'm going to go up a weight class, and I'm going to be national champion this next year. And the weight class that I was going into was the toughest weight class in the NCAA. It was like stacked up. And the guy that was the defending champion, he was actually a senior going for his 3rd title, and he was like the number 1 college wrestler, pound for pound, and had won like 70 matches in a row or something. So the whole year I'm visualizing, I'm doing everything that I think I need to do to win. And I get back to the finals, and I'm wrestling this guy that's the pound for pound number 1 guy in the country, going for his 3rd title. He's a senior, I'm a sophomore, and it's a super tight match, but I come out on top in the end, and I win the match. And I was so happy and just elated and all that. It felt like I kind of righted that wrong, and that all my hard work had been worth it. And I celebrated my coaches and my family and all my teammates, and it felt so good. And so that night was great. And the next day, I still felt great. And then a couple days after that, I was like, all right, like it still feels good, but not that good. And then about a week went by, and I really didn't care about it. I was like, okay, what's next? And that lesson was, to me, the most important lesson that I learned in resilience, because I felt both sides of the coin. I felt the highest high of winning, the lowest low of losing in that same moment. And what I realized is that they're not that different. The feelings fade, The loss, the feeling of the loss probably is going to last a little longer, but it's going to fade. The feeling of the win, that's going to fade very quick. So if you want to, I think, live the best life, just try to find consistency, try to just continue to be resilient through the losses, but also resilient through the wins. Don't get too high on the highs, don't get too low on the lows, because there's always going to be another opportunity to continue to improve and grow. And that's really what it's about. Resilience to me is synonymous with growth, because we push through hard things and we don't let whatever obstacles in front of us, we don't let that stop us. We don't let it. And even if we overcome the obstacle, I think sometimes people, they start smelling the roses a little too quickly as well, and they think a little too much of themselves. So it's just staying grounded in resilience, humility, gratitude, and growth. And yeah, for me, that I'm really glad I was able to learn those lessons.
I love that. And I'm familiar with your story of not being a national champ freshman year, but to hear you actually share it, thank you for doing that. It's pretty awesome. Bo, this was great. I leave you with, when you wrestle Khamzat, I want to be there in the arena. I want to see that UFC fight. It's awesome to watch your journey, and not only that, but and I hear a lot from, like, when Brian Stan was fighting in the UFC, not everybody's a good dude, and that's just the reality of it. And you're a good dude, and it's really cool to see you in that spotlight and keep preaching all this stuff, because it matters, and it matters for our next generation too. It's important.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate, you saying that, and that means the world to me. So very grateful that you took some time to chat with me. I'm really, really appreciative of it. And we'll get you at that fight. No problem. We'll get you cage side ready to rock and roll.
There you go. Thanks, Bo.